Hey guys, thanks for joining me for episode of Learn to Play Games. My name is Lance, and today we're going to take a look at Who Goes There. This is a brand new game by Certifiable Studios. It is a 3 to 6 player game that takes roughly an hour and a half to 3 hours to play, and it is a cooperative, semi-competitive hybrid type of game, as you guys are going to see. So the game itself is based on an old book that was later also turned into a movie, as you guys may be familiar with The Thing. And the basic premise behind this is that you are a research team in Antarctica and you have come across this alien that is frozen in the ice. As a team, you're able to get that alien out and transport it back to your camp where you're hoping to do some research on it. And unfortunately, as once you guys get it back to the camp, it thaws out and all hell breaks loose. It starts attacking the team and slowly assimilates and replicates the team so that no one knows who truly is human anymore and who is alien. And the ultimate goal of the alien, obviously, is to make it back to civilization so that it can basically take over the world. So in the game itself, you're going to be playing members of that research team, and you are going to be going outside to search in the different phase decks, hopefully trying to find helicopter bonuses that will help you in the end of the game. And you're also going to be working inside, trying to find buildable items so that you can upgrade and get better equipment and different gear that is going to help you throughout the game handle these different encounters that you're going to come across and deal with, as well as fighting off the thing. As the game progresses, players are going to be required to draw vulnerable cards when they fail different tests and different things come up. And at some point, one of the players is going to become infected. At that point, that player is going to become the host, and the game will continue on. Nobody will know that that player is infected. And that player will have some choices at that point. He can also try to infect other players during different actions, as you guys will see. Or he can also just try to slip onto the helicopter and make it out and try to be a detriment to the team as he does so. So my opinions of this game so far, this is one that I was a Kickstarter backer and was super excited about checking this one out, and I found the team over at Gen Con this year. I had a chance to sit down with them and talk about their game and really had a good time. So I would definitely recommend checking this one out. This is one that really does a good job of capturing the theme. I love the art style with this one. They really did a great job with that. I just love the different cartoon kind of horrific feel to it. And I love the different aspects of the game. As you guys play through this game, like I said, initially everybody starts out as humans. So everybody's working together, everybody's really happy to contribute and try to help each other out and get each other different gear and really help to try to continue to build. But as the game progresses and players are starting to draw those vulnerable cards, that paranoia sets in and you really don't know if you can completely trust them anymore. So there's that big shift as players start drawing those cards, and then if a player is infected, that changes a lot too, as you don't know that that player is infected, and depending upon how that player wants to play the game, they can still try to pass off as a human, or they can also try to start infecting other players to help them in their cause. So I definitely recommend checking this one out. Like I said, everything that they did with this one was really well done. The production on this one was great. The minis look good. The dice are fantastic. I love that little helicopter dice that's sculpted. It has all these little tentacles and things on it. Really, really cool little features that they threw in. So like I said, of course, these are just my opinions. I'd also love to hear your guys' in the comment section down below. Is this one that you guys backed as Kickstarters, or is this one that you're just finding out for the first time, and are you interested? Is this one you're looking at picking up? I would love to hear those comments in the section below, so let me know. And as always, if you enjoy these videos, if you like what I do, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel, as it will help me to continue to bring these great videos to you guys. And also, if you guys want notifications every time I release new videos, also consider ringing that bell so that you'll get notifications every time I release new content. So let's go ahead and head to the table, and I'll teach you guys how to play. So there are two different types of dice included in the game. The first are the action dice, and they are 50-50 dice. Half of the sides are going to be blank, and half of the sides will have the flames, which are successes. Then we have the helicopter die, which is a customly made die that is a standard D6, but it's really cool. It has all these little sculptings on there for the little things, tentacles and stuff, so just a really, really cool thematic die. There are 7 different decks of cards included in the game, plus the player decks, so I'm going to take you guys through each one of those. So the first two we're going to look at are the workshop and storage deck. So the workshop deck is going to be your main resource for all the different buildable items. There are 5 different buildable items you'll find in that deck, which are cloth, screws, wood, metal, and rope. You're also going to find some trash in there as well. Then we have the storage deck, which you'll find your other two buildable items, which are alcohol and matches, as well as a plethora of other items, including first aid, canned food, different weapons and items, trash, and various other things. The next two decks of cards are the camp event cards, which are going to be comprised of three different types of cards. You have attack, setback, and instant cards, as well as some of those cards will have the lock symbol on them. And I'm going to go into more detail about how these are going to work a little bit later. Then we have the vulnerable cards. This deck is comprised of 12 cards. One will have the bloodstain on it. When a player draws that card, they will become infected and will become the host, which I'll go into more detail about that later. And then there are 11 blank cards, which means that the player is still human, but the other players will not know that. The last three decks are the phase decks for phase 1, 2, and 3. These are the decks the players are going to be searching mainly for the helicopter bonus cards, which will help them at the end of the game be victorious. So these decks are going to be comprised of 7 different types of cards. You're going to have special item cards that will go next to the player's board and will give them certain bonuses. You'll have lockbox cards, which will either gain you additional experience, or you can take a chance by rolling an action dice, and if you're successful, you'll receive some sort of an item or bonus. You'll have tile cards, which will give you specific items, or you can choose to gain experience with them. You'll have choice cards, which again, you'll have a choice of either taking experience or receiving other items. You'll have the different helicopter bonus cards. These are the 3 different cards you'll find in the 3 different phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. You'll also have door damage cards, which will do direct damage to the door. And then the thing cards, which I wanted to show you guys all 3 of those as well for phases 1, 2, and 3, because I just love the artwork on these things, and it slowly shows the progression of the thing from being very minimal, only seeing a little bit of it, to seeing a little bit more, and then finally seeing the whole thing at the end of the game, which is really neat and very thematic in the way that they did that. One other thing to keep in mind with these, anytime a player searches one of these decks, they will receive 2 experience points on top of anything that the card grants, and these decks can only be searched based on the phase that it is in. So in phase 1, you can only search the phase 1 deck, and the additional decks will be unlocked later on as the players move through the phases. Once a phase is unlocked, you can search either deck, moving either to the current deck or previous decks, finally moving into the third deck. The first time you play the game, you're also going to want to set up your tile organization tray, and you can do this in any manner you choose. I have it broken down into the weapons and utilities, and further broken down into the weapons and the upgrades to each of those weapons. So throughout the game, the players are going to be working to get these different weapon and utility tiles to improve their characters. Each of these tiles is going to give the characters different bonuses, whether they're bonuses or additional dice for when they're rolling attack actions, or when they're resolving attack events, or when they're resolving setback events for the blue side. Each of these is going to give the players additional action dice when resolving those events, or special abilities as the players have different items. So for example, with the club, the players must spend the required buildables to gain the club tile, and then they can slowly upgrade that club into different things. So they can take the club into a torch, which will give them additional abilities, or once they have the torch, they can upgrade it to the lantern, which will also give them additional abilities and a special ability at the bottom. Or they could take the club into the barricade, which will give them different abilities from that. So the players can tailor their different items to meet the needs that their particular player is going for. Moving over to the game boards. Now there are 2 different game boards, as you guys are going to see. Each of these boards is going to be considered a location, which is very important. So there is an inside location and an outside location. Here we have the inside location, and it's going to have a number of different things on it. So first off, the inside location is going to have a bonfire where players can play cards face down, and then when there are 5 or more cards on here, one of the players can light the bonfire, and then any of the players in the inside location here, no matter which space they're on, will gain 2 stamina. Then we have the camp discard pile, which there are going to be different events or things that will cause players to discard cards, which you're going to play face down in there. Then we have the 2 different spaces. We have the storage room and a quick reference to all the different items and cards you're going to find in that storage room deck. And then the workroom, and again, a quick reference to all the different items you'll find in that deck. Then we have 2 spaces for the characters to be placed in those in this location. Then we have the boiler room. The boiler room throughout the game will take strikes, and if there are ever 3 strikes on the boiler room, it will explode. When it explodes, all the players on the inside location, no matter what space they're on, will take 1 strike, and they are not allowed to use their gain stamina action until the boiler room has less than 3 strikes on it. And this is going to happen every single time the boiler room has 3 strikes on it. So if the players only repair the boiler room down to 2 strikes and another strike comes up, that will trigger again. So it's very important to keep that boiler room repaired as best as possible. The other location we have is the outside location. So this board is broken into a number of different areas. First off, we have the helicopter, which will only be used at the end of the game, and I'll cover that a little bit more later. Then we have a spot for the vulnerable deck to be placed, and a discard area for the phase decks. As players draw cards, they'll be resolved instantly and then placed over in the discard pile. Then we have the phase 1, 2, and 3 deck locations, and spaces for each of the players as those different phases are opened up. Then we have a round tracker that's broken into the 3 phases again, and will have different things in effect. So each time the players are out and a temperature drop comes into play, they're going to lose stamina based on the phase that they're in. So as the players progress throughout the game, it's going to get nastier and nastier outside. And there is the gray spaces as well, so there are 2 different ways you can play the game. You can play a standard game of 15 rounds or an extended game of 18 rounds, that is when you'll use the gray spaces. Now there's also an eat and sleep phase in each of the rounds, and I'm going to cover this a little bit more later. Finally, we have the camp door, which works similarly to the boiler room. As players go through the phase decks, they're going to have cards that are going to do damage to the camp door and add strikes to it. If there are ever 3 or more strikes on the camp door, then it is going to be broken. When it is broken, players inside must instantly draw a vulnerable card each, and then the temperature drops are now going to affect players on the inside as well until that door has less than 3 strikes on it. So again, just like the boiler room, players are going to have to be very careful and manage the amount of strikes on the camp door, as it will drastically impact the players on the inside. And players on the outside are the only players that can repair the camp door. Just like on the inside location, only players on the inside can repair the boiler room. The last couple things I want to cover real quick are the experience gems. There are 2 different values. We have 1-point gems and 5-point gems. And the strikes. There are 2 different types of strikes. There are regular strikes, which if a player ever receives 3 or more strikes, then they are eliminated from the game. And then there are critical strikes, which at the end of each player's turn, if they don't remove these after the turn that they receive them, then they will receive an additional regular strike. And for this demo, I'm also going to be using these really cool customizable trays from Crystal Fortress, and you guys will be able to find links at the bottom in the description for those. At the beginning of the game, each player is going to choose a character they'd like to play as, and then they will receive their character's board. Each character's board is broken down into a number of different sections. At the top of the board, we have the player's action section, and this is where all the action cubes are going to go. And it also has a quick reference of all the different actions a player can perform during their turn, and the number of cubes they must spend to perform those actions. Then we have the exhausted stamina board, where all the exhausted stamina is going to go, and the stamina track, which is the number of natural dice the player is going to be able to roll against attacks and setbacks based on their stamina that they have. So if a player has any stamina in the red area, they'll get to roll 1 dice, and if the player has any stamina in the green area, then they'll get to roll 2 action dice. Then we have the player's experience or upgrade area. As they gain experience gems, they can place them over in their section over here. And as they get those experience gems, they can spend them to unlock the various different abilities that each player has. Most of these abilities will be the same for all the players. Each player also does have 1 unique ability that's specific to them. So once that ability is unlocked, that tile is going to be flipped, and the green side shows that ability is active. Now there's a couple other tokens that will be placed initially to remind the players that those areas are locked. And then as the game goes on, you can spend those experience to unlock those different things. Each character is also going to have a rank that is going to determine the leader at the beginning of the game, as you guys will see a little bit later. And then each player also has a quick reference to the breakdown of the number and type of cards that are included in their customized player or character deck. Then at the bottom of the card is the different item slots. Each character can hold a maximum of 2 items at the beginning of the game, and that's where the items are going to go. And then each player also has an extra item slot that can be unlocked with experience later on in the game. In order to do setup for the players, each player is going to receive their character board, their customized deck of cards. They will receive 6 action cubes, which 5 of them will be placed in the action slot, and 1 will be placed in the agility slot to be unlocked later on. Then each player is also going to receive 6 action or stamina cubes, which are going to be placed 3 here, 2 in the exhausted area, and 1 finally in the cardio area to be unlocked later on. Each character also has their own custom locker die, which is going to have their symbol on it in 2 areas, and then some other symbols that all the players will have. Each player is also going to receive their own miniature for their character, a quick reference guide for the weapons and utilities, and a infection clicker. And I'm going to go into the details on this a little bit more later. Board setup is very easy. First off, you're going to lock the 2 joining boards for the different locations inside and outside. Then you're going to go ahead and shuffle up all the decks that are used in those locations. So starting with our indoor location, we have the storage deck and the workroom or workshop deck. Then on the outside, we have the vulnerable card deck and phases 1, 2, and 3. Then we can also place out the helicopter die in the helicopter location and a round marker in the white round marker square. Then we can place out the camp event board and all the camp event cards. You can shuffle those up and place that deck out. From here, then you can place out all the different tokens and experience and strikes, as well as any of the dice that you're going to be using for the game, the action dice. And then the players can place out their boards as well. So I'm going to go ahead and set up for a 4-player game, and this is going to be kind of tight, so bear with me on that. Each player's deck is also shuffled up individually, and each player starts the game with the infection counter set at the neutral level, and they will not reveal that to any player normally, so you want to keep this down. And each player is also going to start the game as a human player, so you don't have to worry about anybody starting the game infected already. Who Goes There is played over 15 or 18 rounds, depending upon the player's choice. During each round, players were going to search, build, trade, and upgrade their characters as they search for helicopter parts. Players are also going to deal with escalating camp events, the thing trying to get to them, and their own paranoia, as they will later on, as the game progresses, they will not know who to trust and who is human and who is infected and is the thing. There's a couple of other things we have to cover real quick before moving into the game. So the first is choosing a team leader, which will be the character with the highest rank or the lowest number. So in our situation here, Gary would be our team leader. This is going to have a few extra responsibilities attached to it. This player will be the first player each round and will choose the rest of the turn order, whether the players go in a clockwise manner or counterclockwise. They will also be in charge of the camp event board and will also remind players to resolve their camp events during their turn. They are also going to handle the pre-round steps. Now, when determining which player is the team leader, the highest ranking player can always choose another player to take command if they want to. And if the team leader dies, the responsibilities are going to be passed to the next player in turn order. Now, being the team leader also comes with a few perks. They are going to be the first to board the helicopter, and they will also be in charge of the boarding process, as you guys will see later. The last thing we need to do before beginning the game is that each player in turn order is going to draw 1 card from the storage, workshop, and their specialty deck. So we'll go ahead and start with our team leader over here. He gets to draw 1 workshop, 1 storage, and 1 card from his specialty deck. And then he's going to choose to go in a clockwise manner. So moving over to our second player here, he'll get 1 of each card. From here, then each player is going to choose their starting space, which a character can either start in the workshop, the storage room, or the phase 1 outside location. One thing to keep in mind with the outside location is that players who start outside will suffer a temperature drop at the beginning of each round, and temperature drops are going to be depending on the phase and will cause the player to lose a number of stamina depending upon the phase number. So initially in phase 1 they'll lose 1 stamina per round, in phase 2 they'll lose 2 stamina per round, and in phase 3 they'll lose 3 stamina per round that they're outside. Before each round, the team leader is going to take the team through a pre-round sequence. There's also a quick reference guide to this at the bottom of the camp event board. So let's go ahead and start with our team leader taking us through this sequence. So the first step in the sequence is to move the phase marker to the next round. So if you're playing an extended game, you're going to move the phase marker to the dark gray space. And if you're playing a standard game, you'll go ahead and move them to that first white space. So let's go ahead and play a standard game. We'll go ahead and move them to that first white space, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. Step 2 is resolving an eat or sleep round if applicable. So at the end of each phase, there are 2 special rounds which the players will have to plan for, eat and sleep rounds. So all players are required to eat food during a food round. Players must play a canned food card, not a snack. During the pre-round sequence of each food round, players who do not play a canned food card will become vulnerable and must draw 1 vulnerable card. Then we have the sleep rounds, which will be the last round in each phase. All players are required to sleep on a sleep round. For safety, players must bunk in pairs, and they must be in the same location but don't need to be in the same space. If neither player has a vulnerable card, nothing further happens. If either player has a vulnerable card, then the player or players that have the vulnerable card must pass their infection clicker to the other bunking player. Human players that are not infected can only show the green side of the clicker. So, for example, a non-infected player must pass their clicker with the green side showing. Infected players can either show the green side or the infected side to the other player if they choose. Once a player looks at the clicker, you're going to reset it to its neutral side and pass it back to the other player. Remember, keep this hidden from other players, so once you set it, you're going to go ahead and pass it to the other player. That player will look at it and then pass it back in the neutral setting. And make sure that you're aware of which way you're going and set it up where other players can't figure it out. So obviously, if you always have the green side up and you push it up, then players are going to know that you're infected, so plan for that. Players can also choose to sleep alone, but any player that sleeps alone will become vulnerable and must draw 1 vulnerable card. The third step is that players outside will suffer a temperature drop. Players outside lose stamina based on the round that they're in, and each round is going to tell you the negative amount of stamina that you'll receive. So during the first phase, you'll lose 1, during the second phase, you'll lose 2, and during the third phase, you're going to lose 3. During a temperature drop, if a player has no stamina on their board, they are going to begin to freeze and will receive 1 strike. This will continue to happen each round unless a player can replenish their stamina or move back inside. A player does not receive a strike as long as they have at least 1 stamina, even if they are required to lose more than they have. The fourth step is that players are going to reset their actions and their lock or die. So each player is going to place all their action cubes back on their player boards, so throughout the player's turn they're going to spend their action cubes and move them off the board. So during this step they're going to go ahead and move all their action cubes back onto their action board, and if they've unlocked their lock or die, then they can go ahead and choose to re-roll that dice, or if they've used it, then they're going to go ahead and roll it. Once they've rolled it, then they'll place it back with the rest of their actions, and they can use it during their turn. But if a player has not used their action die, they do not have to choose to re-roll it if they don't want to. Step 5 is flipping over the next camp event card and then placing it in the camp discard pile face up. This will be the camp event in play for the round. A camp event is going to affect all players in the camp regardless of their location unless it's locked. Each player must resolve the camp event on their turn, and it does not cost any actions to resolve the camp event, and it can be done at any point during their turn. If a player ends their turn and forgets to resolve the camp event, then they're going to suffer that event's penalty. And this is part of the team leader's responsibility, is to keep track of his team and make sure that they remember, or to remind them to make sure that they resolve their camp event so that they don't just suffer the bad effects. As you guys saw earlier, there are 3 different types of event cards. Attack cards are red, setback cards are blue, and instant cards are green. For attack and setback cards, during each player's turn, they must resolve this event. They can do it at the beginning, middle, or end of their turn. It doesn't matter as long as they resolve that event. Now, if a player happens to forget and the leader does not remind them, then they will have to suffer whatever penalty is on that event. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of this. We're going to go ahead and flip over the top event card and see what it is. So it is an attack. This is a dog attack. And if we fail to resolve this event, we're going to receive 1 strike. So how do we resolve an event? To resolve an attack or setback, players are going to need to roll the required number of successes based on the current phase. So this is phase 1, so we're going to need 1 success. And if we do not roll 1 success, then we will suffer the failure effects. So first off, we're going to gather a number of action dice based on the natural defense, which is based on the amount of stamina the player has. Now we're either going to receive 1 action dice or 2. Right now with Gary here, his stamina is at 3, so we would only receive 1 natural defense dice. If he would have had 4 or more stamina, then we would receive the second one. Then we're going to add any additional dice that we receive from any items that we have, matching the event type. So this is an attack, so our hatchet will grant us 1 additional dice for attacks. And then finally, a player can choose to play any cards that are allowed while resolving an event, even after the dice are rolled. So Gary is going to look through his cards, and he can choose to play 1 in the chamber. This will add 2 action dice to an attack roll. So he could choose to use that if he wanted to. Let's go ahead and just try our luck. So we're going to go ahead and roll both of these dice and see what happens. We just need 1 success. So we got it. We have 2 successes, so we have successfully passed that event. Now, one other thing is that you cannot spend any other actions while an event is being resolved. The only thing you could do is play cards like I said. So let's go ahead and look at the next card in the stack and see what it is. So this is a setback, and this works exactly the same way. During a player's turn, we would again gather our dice, so we would receive 1 for the stamina, and our hatchet also gives us 1 for setbacks. So we would receive 2 dice again, and again, if we had any cards that would help us, we could play those. But Gary does not have any cards for setbacks. So again, we would have to roll our 2 dice, and again, we rolled very well and passed. So the third and final type of event are the instant events. Those are going to be resolved in step 6, and those are going to take effect before any of the players go. So once an instant effect has been resolved, then during the players' turns, they will not have to worry about a camp event during that round. The one other type of effect on the cards are the locks. So as we can see here on this card, there's a little lock up in the corner here. That is a lockdown. So when a camp event card has the lockdown symbol, that means the camp is locked down. During a lockdown, only players inside are required to resolve the camp event, and players can no longer move to another location until the camp is unlocked, which will happen when a camp event card without a lock symbol is in play. So during this round, any players that are outside will not have to resolve a camp event, but they also cannot move back inside. So if we flip over the next card, so the next round, this card does not have a lock, so now the players are able to move back inside. But if you have multiple cards come up that have the lock symbol on them, that could mean that the players are outside for multiple rounds, which could be really, really bad as they're losing stamina each round that they're outside. So the final step in the pre-round sequence is that the round will start and the players will get to take their turns. So we're always going to start with the leader, and then he has already said that we were going to go clockwise, so it would proceed in a clockwise manner around the table with each player getting to take their turn. So one last thing I forgot to do, when we collected our 3 cards for the players, they were also supposed to put their figures out. So let's go ahead and take care of that real quick now and resolve any effects from the pre-round sequence for that. So leader will go there. McCready is going to go outside. So during the pre-round sequence, he would take 1 stamina loss for temperature drop. Then the doc will go. He's going to go in here as well. And the cook will also join his teammates in the workshop. A player will begin each turn with 5 action cubes. They can spend these to do a variety of different actions. Players can repeat the same action more than once as long as they have the required amount of action cubes to spend. And the one other important thing are the cards. Everyone is allowed to say what cards they have and what cards they need, but they are never allowed to show their cards to other players. And players cannot look through any of the discard piles. Players must also end their turn with no more than 5 cards, as that is their hand limit. but they can hold any number of cards before and during their turn. So even if you've acquired more cards before your turn or during your turn, as long as at the end of your turn you have 5 cards or less, you're okay. If not, then you're going to go ahead and discard any cards you don't want, either into the bonfire or camp discard pile. Moving into our player's turn now, let's go ahead and take a look at all the different actions that our player can perform. So the first one is a move action. This is going to require us to spend 1 movement cube, and then we can move to any space regardless of location. A space must be unlocked, and a player cannot switch locations if a camp event with the lockdown is in play. The one other important note with this is that a player can only move to one location during the round. So for example, with Gary here, if he chose to move outside, he must move to the first phase space as the other 2 are still locked. And then once he's there, he cannot spend another move action to move back inside this round. He'll have to wait till next round. But if Gary stays inside, let's say he spends a move action to move over here, he can go ahead and do a search action next, and then if he wants to, he can move back over here. You can move back and forth in the same location any number of times during your turn, as long as you have the action cubes to do so. A search action is going to require the player to spend 2 action cubes, and then they can draw a card from the space that they're currently on. If they are inside, they can also choose to draw from their specialty deck. So again, with Gary, he could go ahead and choose to spend 2 action cubes, and then he could either draw a card from the workshop, or since he's inside, he could also draw a card from his specialty deck. To perform a build action, you're going to spend 1 action cube, and then you're going to show the players your buildable items and which item tile you wish to build. From there, then you can go ahead and gather that item tile and equip it to one of your item slots. So again, let's go ahead and say that during Gary's first action, he went and searched the workshop, and he received a buildable item that he could use. So now he's going to go ahead and perform a build action. So he's going to spend 1 of his action cubes, show the players that he has 2 buildable items, wood and screws, which is enough to get him a club. Then he's going to take these items, place them face down in the discard, and gain a club tile, which then he's going to equip to one of his item slots. The gain stamina action costs 1 action cube, and then the player is going to roll 1 action dice. This is only available inside, and if he rolls success, then he will gain 1 stamina. If he rolls a miss, then nothing happens. And the one other important thing with this is to remember that if the boiler room has 3 or more strikes on it, the players cannot choose to do this. So let's go ahead and say with Gary here, he could spend another one of his actions if he wanted to try to gain stamina. He would roll 1 action die, and if it comes up as a success, then he would receive 1 stamina, so he could move 1 exhausted stamina to his stamina track. Gaining experience works pretty much the same way as gaining stamina. You're going to spend 1 action cube, and then you're going to roll an action dice. Now this is only available when you're outside. If you roll a success, then you're going to gain 1 experience point, or 1 experience gem, and if you roll a miss, then nothing is going to happen. A player can also perform a repair action. They can do this by spending 2 action cubes, and then they get to remove 1 strike from the boiler room while they're inside, or from the camp door while outside. Alternatively, a player can choose to only spend 1 action cube, and then they're going to roll an action die. If they roll a success, then they're going to get to remove 1 strike, and if they roll a miss, nothing happens. So Gary notices that there is 1 strike on the boiler room door, and he has 1 action remaining, so he's going to go ahead and spend that action and roll an action die. If he rolls a success, then he gets to remove this strike, and if he would have rolled a fail, then nothing would have happened, and he would have just wasted his action. A player might also need to reserve some of their action cubes. Sometimes you will need to save an action cube at the end of your turn for a future trade during the round. To reserve an action, you're simply going to leave the action cube on the action tray at the end of the turn. Any reserved action cubes may only be used to receive cards during a trade. In order to receive, you're going to spend 1 action cube to receive any number of cards from another player during a trade action. If a player plans to reserve an action, they must also make sure that they do not have a full hand of cards at the end of their turn. They may discard or play cards during their turn to make room as normal, and if they end their turn with a full hand of cards, they may still pass them during any trades. Let me give you guys some more details about trading cards. So cards from the storage room, workshop, or the player's specialty deck are the only game components that can be traded between players. Two players can initiate a trade as long as they are in the same location, but not necessarily the same space. And it must be one of the two players' turns. The players are not allowed to show their cards being traded, and a player can pass one or more cards during a trade, and both players do not need to pass cards. Any player taking cards during a trade must spend one action to receive those cards. Trades do not cost any actions for the player giving cards unless that player also receives a card. And a player involved in a trade when it's not their turn will be trading out of turn. And this is the only time players can spend an action when it is not their turn. Before their turn happens, players can receive cards during a trade since they have actions available. Players that have already taken their turn must have an action cube in reserve in order to receive any cards during a trade. And the one other important thing is that there are vulnerable trades. If either player has a vulnerable card, they must pass their clicker when passing a card. One other important thing, during trades with an infected player, the receiving player still has a chance to avoid taking the clicker. The action spent to receive cards during a trade also allows the player to roll one action die to try to avoid taking the clicker. On a success, they do not need to take the clicker. On a fail, they can choose to spend another action cube to re-roll that action die, or they must take the clicker. Once a player agrees to a trade and rolls a die, it now is locked, and the trade must be completed at that point. The last type of an action a player can perform is a player assault, and this is reserved only for the direst of situations. This is not an action to be taken lightly, and I would only recommend using it if you really are backed into a corner. So if a player feels they have discovered an infected player, they have the option to perform an assault during their turn. Assaulting is location specific, so players must be at the same location as the player they wish to assault, but they don't need to be in the same space. This can only be done on that player's turn and is going to cost 5 action points, so it's going to take up almost their entire turn if they've purchased the additional action already. Both human and infected players can assault. In order to perform an assault, you're going to notify the group who you're assaulting. Then the player is going to gather their dice pool. They will gather any natural dice that they're allowed and any additional dice granted by any equipped item tiles with red numbers on them. Each success is going to deal 1 strike to the player being attacked, and that player being assaulted cannot roll any defense. You must roll all available action dice when assaulting as well, so you cannot choose to go light on a player if you would end up rolling more action dice than are required. You have to roll all the ones that you have. And if that player receives 3 or more strikes, then that player is going to be eliminated from the game. So moving back over to Gary's turn, he's spent all of his actions already, so the last thing we need to do is resolve the event. So first off, we're going to determine how many dice we need. We have our natural defense dice. We have 1 in green, so we'll receive 2. And then we also have a club, which is going to give us an additional 1 since this is an attack. So we'll go ahead and grab that. So we have 3 dice. So let's go ahead and give them a roll. We just need 1 success because we're in the first phase. And we did get 1, so we are okay. We will not take a strike. So let's go ahead and move over to the next player's turn at this point, and I will take you guys through one more turn. So going over to McCready's turn, he is outside, so let's go ahead and perform a search action. So this is going to take 2 cubes, and right away, as soon as you do a search action, you're going to receive 2 experience crystals. So we found geographic maps, so this is just going to go off to our side here. This will help us at the end, and this is the main goal. This is what we're looking for. And let's go ahead and take another search action. We'll look outside again, see if we can get something else. All right, so we found a lockbox. So again, we're going to gain 2 experience points for looking, and this is going to either give us 2 more experience points, or we can roll 1 action die. And if you roll a success, you're going to gain a torch item. That would be really handy to have. So let's go ahead and risk it. We'll go ahead and roll the die and see if we can get that item. All right, so we did successfully get it. So we'll grab the torch item and place it down in our area. So at this point, we have 1 action remaining. So let's go ahead and try to get 1 more experience since we're outside. And we missed, so we will not get that. Let's go ahead and we have we have a card here. For Dex, this will give us 1 additional action this turn, so we'll go ahead and spend that, and we'll bring him back inside. And then we can also spend some of his cubes, or his experience, to unlock some of these panels on here. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and spend 2 to get his additional stamina, and that's just going to go straight into his stamina track. And let's go ahead and resolve the event. So he's going to get 1 for his natural defense, and the torch will also give him 1, so he's going to receive 2. All right, so he got 1 success. That's all we need, so we are good. And that is the end of his turn, as he doesn't have anything else he wants to do. So at this point, then we move on to the next player. There's a couple additional rules for item tiles and building that I'd like to go into real quick. So players can never equip duplicate items, and players can only equip 1 type of coat at any time. Also, any reroll attributes can only be used once per turn, and only 1 action die, not all of them are allowed to be rerolled. And with building, when you're inside, a player can build items, and to do this, the player must collect the buildables needed for the item he wishes to build. Then he's going to spend 1 of his action cubes and play the cards needed to collect the tile from the tray. Only 1 item per action cube spent can be built. And if a player's item slots are full, a tile must be discarded to make room for a new one, unless they don't want the new one, which is kind of weird. Item tiles may be discarded at any time during a player's turn, and discarded items are returned back to the tray. And again, items can never be traded between players. So as the players play through the game and they fail some of the event checks, or they don't have any food during an eat round, or they sleep alone during a sleep event, they are going to be required to draw vulnerable cards. As the players draw cards, when the first player draws a contaminated vulnerable card, which is the vulnerable card with the blood splatter on it, as you guys can see in the top corner here, that player is going to become the host. And the host has a very important role. The host is the only player that can perform an infection attack, which I'm going to cover that in a couple minutes. On top of that, being infected, once a player becomes infected, that is now their permanent status, and it cannot be removed by any means. An infected player no longer will count towards the final helicopter total needed to escape, which I'm going to cover the helicopter in more detail a little bit later in the video. If an infected player is able to sneak on board, their bonuses and the bonus roll will also count against the human players. And in order to spread the infection to another player, the infected player is going to need to pass the infected status on their clicker when they trade or bunk with another player. An infected player must have at least 1 vulnerable card to be able to spread the infection, and they also must have 1 vulnerable card in order to use the clicker. Up until that point, until players start getting the vulnerable cards, these are not in play and will not be used, and only the players that have the vulnerable cards will use them. I'd like to go into some more detail about the infection clicker now. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of this, as it's the easiest way to show you guys how this works. So let's go ahead and say that during the cook's turn, he is going to be required to draw a vulnerable card for whatever reason. He's going to go ahead and draw the top card of the vulnerable deck and not reveal it to any of the other players. He's going to keep this card hidden from all other players and secretly look at it himself. So unfortunately, he's drawn the infected card. So at this point, he has become infected, and his goals will stay the same. He's trying to get on the helicopter to get out of this place now. But during his turns, he could also potentially try to infect other players, and that's where the infection clicker is going to come into play. So he's going to go ahead and put this card off to the side, and at this point, anytime he performs a trade action with other players, or he bunks with other players during a sleep round, he's going to be required to pass this infection clicker to the other player that is bunking with him or trading with him. So let's look at an example of this. Let's go ahead and say that our Gary over here has saved an action cube, and we're getting really close. The next round is going to be an eat round, so he is going to need to spend a canned food, or potentially will have to draw a vulnerable card. And he doesn't want to do that, so he's going to put out the call. He's going to say, does anybody have canned food that they're willing to trade me? And of course, the cook says, yes, I have a canned food that I'm willing to trade you. So at this point, Gary says, yes, I will initiate the trade with you to get that canned food. So the cook is going to pass the canned food along with his clicker. Now, this is going to he's going to set the clicker before he passes it. As a human player that has a vulnerable card that's blank, you must pass the clicker with the green side showing as you're a human player. You cannot choose to send it any other way. Now, if you're an infected player, as our cook is, he has the choice. He can either send it over with the green side showing the other player that he is human, and basically deceiving him, trying to convince him that he is still human, or he can send it over with the infected side. If he sends it over with the infected side, when that player looks at it, they become infected. And so let's go ahead and say that he does want to infect the other player. So at this point, he's going to go ahead and pass the card and the infected clicker over to that player. Now, as that player spends an action to receive the card, as part of that action, he can also choose to roll an action die. If he rolls a success, then he will not take the infection clicker, and our cook will take it back. So he did roll a success, so he would not have to take that in clicker. Now, if he would have rolled a failure, then if he had other action cubes, he could spend additional ones to re-roll that action cube. If not, then he must accept that clicker. Once he accepts the clicker, he's going to look at it without revealing it to any other player and try to stay as neutral as possible with this so that you're not revealing any secrets to other players. At that point, once he's looked at the clicker, he's going to set it back to neutral and pass it back to the player that the clicker belongs to. In this situation, he would become infected, and so he would start working together with the cook to basically try to make it off the helicopter. And you don't want to infect all the players, as you guys are going to see later as well. So as I stated earlier, the player that is infected, that is the host, which is the player that has the contaminated vulnerable card, can also choose to perform an infection attack. Now again, I would only recommend using this as a last-ditch effort, because obviously it is going to identify you as an infected player right away, so you're probably only going to last maybe one more round before other players start attacking you and trying to eliminate you. So in order to perform an infected attack, the player must have one clean vulnerable card for each player they wish to target for the attack. This is going to cost 5 action cubes and can only target players in the same location as the host. Again, not necessarily in the same space. From there, then you're going to announce the attack and show the infection vulnerable card to the targets, showing that you actually have it. Then you're going to spend your 5 action cubes, and then you're going to prepare the vulnerable cards. You're going to take the contaminated card and add 1 clean card, which is a blank card, per player being attacked. Then you're going to go ahead and shuffle those cards up and fan them out face down, and then each player is going to take 1 following turn order. Finally, the host player is going to keep the last card that was not drawn. The player with the infected card becomes the new host. And the old host is still infected, he just is not the host anymore, unless he drew the infected card. Moving into the last part of the game, let's go ahead and cover the helicopter total. This is the number of points required by the human players to successfully escape. This total is determined by the number of human players in the game, even dead ones, and then is multiplied by 6. So in our game, we're playing with 4 players, so we need 24 points. If a player who is human dies or is left behind, they're still going to count towards this helicopter total. Any human left behind are no longer able to help the team reach the total when escaping, which we're going to cover a little bit later. Infected players do not count towards this total. Once a player becomes infected, their points are going to be removed from that total, which is not known until the end of the game. And infected players must try to sneak on board the helicopter so that their bonuses will count against the humans and get added to that helicopter total. Moving into the helicopter round. So once the phase marker reaches this round, the boarding process begins. Players can no longer spend actions, play cards, assault, or perform infection attacks. Players do not need to be in a specific location when the boarding process begins. At the beginning of the boarding process, the team leader is going to move their character onto the helicopter space. They are the first ones to board the helicopter. Next, the team leader is going to decide which players will be allowed to board and which will not. The allowed players move their figures onto helicopter space. Now, all players are encouraged to plead their case during this time. The team leader will have the final say, and the team leader can also force a player to step off the helicopter. A player can also decide to step off the helicopter at any point during deliberations, and the leader will then need to agree to let them back on again if they wish to board once again. Now, infected players cannot knowingly leave on the helicopter without a human. So infected players cannot proceed to the departure if there are no humans on board. Now, this all sounds very one-sided for the leader, but that doesn't mean that the players don't have some options. So if everyone is in agreement and they do not trust the leader, they can all agree not to get on board. That will force the leader to do one of two things: to either step off the helicopter or leave by himself. Now, if the leader is infected and no one boards the helicopter with them, they must step off, since an infected player cannot leave without a human. When the leader steps off, this does not mean that they're always infected. As the players know, the players have to have a total that is going to beat the helicopter total. So in order for the leader to step off, sometimes he's doing what is best for the team. So when the leader steps off, the next player following turn order gets on board and is put in charge of the boarding process. And this can happen again, as all the players may not trust the next player, so they can keep cycling through until they find a player that they feel they can trust. Now, the other option is that the team leader can choose to take off alone. This option is only available if the leader is human. And like I said, normally the team leader probably will not want to do this, as he may not have enough of bonuses to make that helicopter total and be successful in the end of the game. Once everyone has agreed who will be on board and who will be staying behind, it's time for every player, to even dead ones, to openly reveal their infection status. Each player is going to set their clicker to their status, and then on the count of 3, all players are going to turn over their infection clickers face up. If all players on board are infected, they lose and the game is over immediately. Otherwise, we'll move on to the departure. Now we're ready to move into the departure. So at the beginning of the departure, we're going to determine the new helicopter total. If there are any infected players on board, their bonus is going to be added to that helicopter total. So as you guys can remember, our helicopter total originally was 24. At this point, with there being 2 infected players, that's going to take 2 of those away, so we're dropped down to a helicopter bonus of 12. Then, if there are any infected players on the helicopter, their bonuses are going to be added to that total. So let's go ahead and determine the bonuses. So with the infected player bonus, if there are any infected players on board the helicopter, they will add their helicopter bonus cards together. And then after the departure, the infected player will roll the bonus die once and add it to their final total, which will be added to the helicopter total. So we have our infected player has 2 helicopter bonus cards, and they get to roll the helicopter infection die. So they rolled a 4 on that as well, so they're going to add 6 back to that helicopter total. From here, that is the only infected player, so that is our new helicopter total. Then we're going to move over to the human players and determine their totals. And you can also do this before the departure just to get a baseline. You just cannot roll the helicopter die before the departure. So to determine the humans' totals, each human player on board the helicopter will add their helicopter bonus cards together. So our player over here has 4 points with his cards, and our player over here has 5 points with his cards. So we have 9 points between the 2 players off the bat, and then each player is also going to roll the helicopter die and add it to that total. So our player over here has 3, so that'll put him at 7, and our player over here rolled 4, so he is at 9. So adding that total together, that is going to get us 16 points total between the 2 players. Once all the bonuses are totaled up and the new helicopter bonus is determined, we're ready to move on to the next step. So moving into the helicopter flight step, the helicopter is taken off, and from this point on, everything relates solely to the players that are on board. All players left behind have lost the game. Then we're going to move into the ending. The players will now follow one of 2 different scenarios to determine how the game ends. If all the players on board are human, then you're going to use scenario 1 and follow the steps on that. If an infected player has snuck on board, then you're going to use scenario 2. And I'm not going to go into details on those. I'll let you guys discover those on your own as you play through the game.